I used to work stocking shelves at a grocery store. It wasn't all that bad, but every now and then you'd get some annoying customers that bother you. I like helping people, but it sucks when someone does something like insisting you totally actually have something in stock when you don't, or when someone yells at you because someone else dropped something. Stuff like that. But the strangest customer I've had to deal with made me quit my job. Made me a little afraid to be around people at all. It was a day like any other, I guess. There was nothing that suggested it was going to be any different from any other mildly monotonous shift. When I was in the latter half of my shift, the point where I'm not quite close to time to go home yet, around when I usually start to zone out, I was in the far corner that is usually always pretty quiet, stocking one of the ends of the aisles with the soup that was on special. Behind me was a little area, kind of separated from the main area, general merchandise. That's where we kept all the random crap like kitchen stuff, pool toys, and the holiday stuff. This clean-shaven guy with a brown buzz cut walked up to me and asked, "Where's the ketchup, buddy?" He was pretty tall, probably close to 7 feet. The guy had a really square jaw. He looked a little rough but friendly at the same time, just your average dude. He kind of struck me as a father, just something about him, I don't know. His blue eyes had this look to them, like he could have cracked into a joke on a moment's notice. Probably a pretty crude one. My first impression of this guy is important, considering what happened afterwards. I had to shake myself a little as I answered him, "In aisle 15. He winked and gave me a thumbs up. "Thanks, buddy, you're a lifesaver." I smiled and I went back to stocking the shelf and saw him wander off into aisle 15 in the corner of my eyes. A few minutes later, after I finished putting the first box on the shelf and went to take the next one off my cart, I saw the same guy was standing close by, looking down at me with this weird expression on his face. Embarrassment, I guess? Then he smiled again. "Where's the ketchup, buddy?" I blinked. He shifted around a bit. Did he forget the aisle? Could he not find it? Or maybe we were just out of ketchup, though I doubted it. Whatever, it was no big deal, obviously. He must have been thinking about something else and forgot. Nothing to be embarrassed about. I pointed the aisle out to him that time. Aisle 15. He winked again and gave me another thumbs up. "Thanks, buddy. You're a lifesaver." And he went to wander down the aisle. I laughed. He stopped and turned back to me just as he was about to turn the corner and gave me this mildly perturbed look. I closed my mouth, and then he went down the aisle, kind of stomping off. I didn't mean to be rude by laughing, and I thought he was having a laugh about it too. A minute later, I saw him going to the checkout with a girl, his wife, I assumed. In another 5 minutes or so, I had finished stocking the shelf end, so I started to bring the cart out back and load up to restock the sparkling water. When I got to the other end of the aisle, the same guy was standing there looking the other way. He seemed totally lost. He turned his head around and caught me in the corner of his eyes, recollection flashing in them. He wasn't holding anything and didn't have a cart. "Didn't find the ketchup?" I asked him politely. He smiles, nods. "Where's the ketchup, buddy?" I can't help blurting out a little laugh. Scratching my head, I wondered if he was fucking with me. Or maybe he was high? He sounded exactly the same as the other times he asked it, almost like he was playing a recording instead of speaking. I decided to show him directly where the ketchup was. "Are we out?" I asked. The guy's smile quivered a little. Maybe he really couldn't find it. "Here, I'll show you where it is." I started walking down the aisle, and sure enough, I could see the ketchup from where I was. The guy blinked and watched me, but he didn't move. This way." I motioned down the aisle. His eyes widened a little, like I was speaking in a foreign language or something. Then, after hesitating, he stumbled after me. His demeanor had suddenly seemed so different from his confident appearance. He came after me shyly, like a lost kid, while I stood in front of the ketchup. The shelf was pretty much full, and if I'm being honest, there's no way someone could have overlooked it unless they were blind or under the influence. I stood by it, and he kept walking until he stopped with a jolt right next to me. Like he didn't understand why I had stopped. He eyed me expectantly, until he opened his mouth to say something. Then his lower lip trembled, and he shut his mouth again. Right here, sir." I pointed to the ketchup bottles. He blinked a few times, looked hard at me, like he was trying to calculate a 50 equation math problem in his head, scanned down my body, and rested his eyes on my pointer finger. It's needless to say it was a really awkward situation. The ketchup is there, I stammered out. His eyes suddenly lit up like he had won the lottery. His dilated pupils and his brown eyes shrunk, then he smiled and nodded vigorously. Thanks, buddy, you're a lifesaver. And he gave me the same thumbs up. I laughed sheepishly. Yeah, happens to the best of us, no worries. I wandered awkwardly back to my cart, turning back to see him smiling contentedly at the ketchup. I loaded up some sparkling water under my cart, but the raspy voice of Greg, the manager, stopped me. No, John. Not my real name, but for reasons that may become apparent, I don't want to say my real name. He came out from behind one of the loaded pallets. He's pretty short, so I didn't see him at first. Bring the pallet of the toilet paper that's on sale out by General Merchandise. Aye, aye, Captain. Greg laughed, though it sounded more like he was choking. I swear the guy smokes at least 2 packs a day, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was 3. I got the pallet ready to take out and started hauling it out towards the doors with a pallet jack. There was someone standing at the doors, probably about to go inside, but they retreated out from behind the plastic windows as I approached. And I inwardly thanked them, since it's kind of hard to stop pulling a pallet once you get it going. I pushed myself through the plastic doors, and someone laughed right next to me as I came out. I thought it was Greg, but I didn't see him go out ahead of me. It didn't sound quite like him either, just a little different. Like someone was mocking him. I turned to the source and saw someone a lot taller than Greg standing there. It was the ketchup guy. He was there smiling. He laughed again, doing his best impersonation of Greg's laugh, and then spoke. Bring a pallet out by General Merchandise. He made his voice raspy, just like Greg's. I didn't really realize it then, but he was bending down a little bit. I just stared at him, taken aback, not really sure what he was up to. Then I kind of half-heartedly smiled, thinking that maybe he knew Greg, or maybe he was just mocking him. I laughed. Yeah, he must know Greg, I thought. He laughed again, sounding almost exactly like the grating chuckle I had heard out back from my manager. He scrunched up a bit more, coming under my height. Still not sure how to react, I laughed uneasily and walked away. The guy called out again, Bring a pallet out by General Merchandise. I said something in response, maybe, good one, or something, I can't remember, and rushed briskly towards General Merchandise. I just brushed the whole thing off as some weird joke, and I had to get my work done. It was a pretty long day by then. Up until that point, I've had run-ins with stranger people. As I put the pallet in place, this young guy with a goatee and glasses came up to me. Excuse me, where's the washroom? He had a British accent. I pointed out to him, it's just around the corner from General Merchandise. He ran off, and I noticed he had a bit of a limp with his right leg. He disappeared around the corner, running. I guess he really needed to go. I heard his heavy footfalls clack as he rushed to the door out of view, and at the same time another set of footsteps approached from one of the aisles, strangely similar. The sound of someone's unique footsteps isn't something I really ever paid attention to at all before, but with his limp they were so distinct. I half expected the guy that just went around the corner to somehow come from the aisle and ask me where the bathroom was again. But it was the damn ketchup guy again. He rushed right up to me. Excuse me, where's the washroom? I raised an eyebrow. He had said it in a British accent, mocking the guy. When I didn't laugh or respond immediately, he looked around with a strange look. At the time, I think he was embarrassed I didn't laugh. Whatever he was doing, I didn't find it funny. Sir, I tried to be polite with him. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm just trying to do my job, okay? His eyes widened. He looked like he was going to cry. My other eyebrow raised. What was up with this guy? He looked around frantically. Excuse me, where's the washroom? I thought he was genuinely asking for a second, but he still said it in his mock British accent. He had to be fucking with me. But his body language and facial expressions suggested otherwise. Sighing and shrugging, I pointed towards the washroom. He nodded, assured but still panicky, and rushed off around the corner. He ran with the same limp the British guy had. Before he rounded the corner, he turned back at me for just an instant. I couldn't read his expression. Shrugging to myself and shaking my head, I took the pallet jack out from under the pallet when I heard a shout come from around the corner. "Good day, young man," an old lady greeted me as she passed by. I nodded to her, still looking in the direction of the corner. "Would you know where I could find the butter?" she asked. I turned away from the corner, cleared my throat. Just down aisle 17 right there." "Oh, and one more thing," she nodded and continued, while I glanced back towards the corner, a shiver running down my spine. Two eyes peered at me from around the corner. My own eyes widened, but the two that looked back at me seemed to be filled with even more terror than mine. Someone was watching from around the corner, and as the old lady spoke, his mouth moved. He was mouthing the same things she was saying. "The cake mix. Do you know where it is?" "Aisle 12, I muttered. That wasn't where it was, but my mind was elsewhere. It was gripped by the twisted and gnarled hand of the uncanny. My stare remained locked with the panicked, shifty eyes of the man that watched us in terror as he whispered the same response as the old lady. "Thank you so much!" The old lady wandered off, and immediately after, the ketchup man rushed from around the corner, his neck bent down in a hunch like the old lady, sweating profusely. I already knew what was coming, but it still didn't make it any less completely fucking bizarre. "Good day, young man," he cooed in the old lady's voice. My eyes twitched. It was an imitation, like a parrot repeating human speech, but it was pretty damn close to the old lady's voice. That grip on my brain tightened, squeezed. It had to be a prank, but there's no way that it was. Someone pulling a prank wouldn't look like that, wouldn't be shivering. He seemed just as shocked as me. He was on the verge of tears. Genuine, pure, stark anxiety was displayed clearly on his face. I didn't know what to feel. An emotion I still don't understand racked my body. I shuddered, and the man trembled. His neck twitched like the nerves inside of them were readjusting, or maybe it was his vocal cords. And then, "Would you know where I could find the butter?" he asked in the old lady's voice. It wasn't like before. It didn't sound like a bad impression anymore, or like an impression at all. It was the old lady's voice. My jaw hung loose, and he seemed composed for half a second before he trembled again, biting his lip. I couldn't tell which of us was more horrified. It didn't make any sense. My mind tried to process why he could be doing what he was doing. When I didn't respond, he stuttered, stammered out some gibberish with the same intonations of the old lady, and then an announcement came over the speakers, a female voice. "Porter to aisle 8 for a wet cleanup." The guy looked straight up, opened his mouth, let it hang, gurgled, and then he repeated the announcement. But he didn't just say it, he repeated it exactly as it had been played by the speakers. His voice had the slight mechanical tint to it that a voice coming out of a speaker did. He said it in the woman's voice. He looked down at me, smiled with wide eyes. I shouted out something at him. It was a purely visceral reaction. There wasn't any sense to it. My mind overwhelmed and recoiling from something I couldn't process. "I don't know what the hell you're doing, but please leave me alone." He jumped back when I shouted, brought his hands up like I was going to hit him. Tears pattered against the floor. The guy started crying. He started sobbing. His whole body was shaking like he was having a seizure, and he muttered, "Excuse me, where's the washroom?" in the British accent of the guy that had originally asked me the question. I looked around. Nobody else was nearby. I didn't know what to do. Who the hell in my situation would know how to respond to something like that? It was so far removed from human behavior, I could only stare. Beneath my stare, he sobbed something out. "Hey, buddy." He cut himself off, his voice trailing into Greg's rough laugh, and he ran away, his back hunched over, his right leg limping. He rushed into the general merchandise area, going behind one of the shelves. I don't know what I would have done if I was still alone then, but someone spoke next to me, a raspy voice. "What's going on here?" It was Greg. It was actually him and not just the guy mimicking his voice. I don't know what I told Greg. I sputtered out a fractured 10-second version of what had happened, still overcome with confusion and horror and I don't know what else. I pointed to the shelf the guy had run behind, and there were his 2 brown eyes watching us. I had fucking goosebumps over my whole body. Felt an indescribable feeling in my gut. Everything about it was wrong. Greg stared and muttered, "What the hell?" The thing whispered it back. Greg went into general merchandise, approached the guy. The guy looked like he wanted to run and hide, but as Greg asked him what he was doing, he mouthed it back, and the guy came out from around the corner, squatting on Greg's level. "What are you doing?" The guy tilted his head at Greg as he repeated him, backing him, retreating like a cornered rabbit. Greg's eyes narrowed. I followed after him. I don't know why. I felt like something awful was going to happen, and I was right. I really wish I hadn't been. In the general merchandise area, there's this really loud air conditioner in the corner. Greg had the guy backed right up to it. Greg's a pretty no bullshit kind of guy, so when the thing started repeating him, he wasn't having it. "Listen, buddy, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The guy was crying again. He laughed in Greg's laugh. "What the fuck?" And then, as he brushed against the air conditioner, the guy's eyes widened so much I thought they would pop out of his skull. He straightened like he had been suddenly electrocuted and screamed. He screamed with many voices and tones all at once, like there was a whole crowd trapped inside of his throat, and it echoed through the whole damn building. Greg backed up. I stood stock still. The guy had fallen to his knees. He brought his hands up to cover his face and sobbed, and the whole time he sobbed, he kept speaking in different voices, repeating the same things he had repeated to me. "Where's the ketchup, buddy? Good day, young man. Bring a pallet out by general merchandise." Greg's laughter mixed with his own sobbing. "Thanks, buddy, you're a lifesaver." He brought one of his hands away from his face. It trembled in front of him, and he slowly formed it into a thumbs up. Then he laughed in Greg's laugh again and started scratching at his throat with his other hand, still keeping the thumbs up. His face fell first on the floor and curled up into a fetal position. By then, a few people had come over to see what was going on. I heard shocked gasps around me, but I didn't avert my eyes. He kept repeating the same sentences again and again and again, sometimes mixing up the voices. The whole time he was crying. Greg uttered to me that he was going to get security, and I said something incomprehensible and kept watching. I remember having a strange thought then. Scrunched up there, he looked like a fetus torn out of the womb too early. Then the guy went stiff as a board, looking straight up at the ceiling with a deadpan expression, and he started humming. He was making the same sound as the loud air conditioner. It didn't sound like a person trying to make a mechanical sound. It sounded identical, like an echo. His whole face and neck were twitching and writhing around like it was melting, boiling, or like something was inside of it trying to pry his own face off. He did that for about 30 seconds before looking up at me, pure despair in his eyes. "Please." He said it in my voice. Exactly in my voice. I gasped something out, and my bewilderment seemed to send him even further over the edge. He leaped up, hunched over, and limped past me as fast as he could, rushing towards the entrance. I watched him leave. Maybe I should have done something, but I was too utterly shocked to do anything but stare when it had happened, and even if I could have moved, what could I have done? What could I even have done? Greg came back with the security guard. I didn't tell him the whole story. I just said the guy ran off. They laughed it off. Greg let me take a break after that. I didn't say anything to anyone the rest of the day. I quit my job that night. I didn't go to that grocery store anymore. I tried to avoid strangers as much as possible. Whenever someone opens their mouth, I almost expect them to start acting like that. I don't know what happened to that man or what he was, if he was even human or what, I don't know. I just don't know.